The morning my life changed forever, I was making coffee, not metaphorically. I was literally standing at the kitchen counter in my bathrobe, measuring 2 tablespoons of ground Ethiopian yerga chefe into the French press, listening to the rain tap against the bay window, thinking about nothing more pressing than whether to wear the gray blazer or the navy one to my 9 o'clock meeting. I had no idea that across the city, in a glass and mahogany office on the 43rd floor, a woman I had trusted for 11 years was signing her name to a document designed to take $9.8 million from me. A document my own husband had helped her draft. He had kissed me goodbye 20 minutes before, standing at the door in his coat, briefcase in hand, his eyes soft and familiar, the way they always were on Tuesday mornings, when he left early for his weekly partner breakfast. "Don't forget dinner at Mom's on Thursday," he had said, and I had smiled and said I wouldn't forget. He kissed my forehead. He closed the door. And somewhere inside that coat pocket, I would later learn, was a copy of the papers he had helped prepare. Papers describing my grandmother's estate, my $9.8 million, as a jointly managed marital asset, subject to family oversight. I didn't know any of that yet. I was still thinking about the blazer. My name is Clara Ashworth. I was 38 years old when this happened, and I had spent the previous 11 years building a life that felt, from the outside at least, remarkably stable. I was a senior partner at Ashworth and Reyes, the architecture firm I co-founded with my college friend Daniela at 29, grown from a 2-person studio above a dry cleaner on Mercer Street into a firm of 42 people with offices in 3 cities and projects on 4 continents. I drove a sensible car, wore sensible shoes, liked good coffee and bad reality television, and long Sunday mornings in the garden with the newspaper and a blanket across my lap. I had the kind of life that doesn't photograph well because its pleasures are too quiet, too interior. The specific weight of afternoon light on a wooden floor, wood smoke through a cracked window on a cold evening, the feeling, which I had worked hard to earn and had never taken for granted, of something being entirely, solidly, legitimately yours. The $9.8 million had come from my grandmother, Eleanor Rose Ashworth, who died 18 months earlier at the age of 91, leaving behind a house in Vermont, a collection of first edition books, some jewelry, and the accumulated proceeds of a decades-long investment portfolio. She had managed herself with the quiet ferocity of a woman who had grown up poor and never forgotten it. She had been a school teacher for 30 years. She had saved every spare dollar she ever earned. She drove a car with 240,000 miles on it and was proud of that. She had left everything to me, her only surviving direct heir, after my father died of a sudden heart attack 4 years before her. No warning, no goodbyes. Eleanor and I had spoken every Sunday for 18 years without fail. I visited Vermont 4 times a year. She taught me chess at her kitchen table and how to read a balance sheet and to pay attention when a smile didn't reach the eyes. "The smile that's locked from the inside," she used to say, "is always a door to something you need to know about." I should have applied that lesson much earlier than I did. My husband's name was Jason Whitmore. We met 11 years ago at an industry conference. He was a corporate attorney. I was presenting on sustainable urban design, and he found me afterward at the drinks table and said my presentation was the first one he'd actually paid attention to all day. He was handsome in a reliable, solid way. Broad shoulders, dark brown eyes, a laugh that started slow and built into something genuinely warm. We married after 3 years of dating, in a small ceremony in Vermont in the garden of my grandmother's house, and Eleanor sat in the front row in a lavender dress and a hat from the 1970s and cried in that contained, dignified way of hers that made even crying look like a form of strength. She had liked Jason, or she had liked the version of Jason she had been allowed to see. Near the end of her life, lucid but tired, she had said to me over the phone, "Clara, you know your own house better than anyone. Don't let anyone redraw the floor plan without your permission." I had laughed and thought she was being metaphorical the way very old people sometimes are. She was not being metaphorical at all. His mother, Brenda Whitmore, had not attended our wedding. An existing commitment she couldn't cancel, Jason had said. I had met her only twice before the ceremony, and she had been pleasant both times. A bottle of excellent wine to the first dinner, attentive questions about my work at the second. I thought, this might actually be fine. I had not yet learned that Brenda Whitmore never did anything she didn't want to do, and that the pleasant questions and the good wine had been an assessment. She had been deciding what I was worth. She'd been deciding whether I was going to be a problem. The wedding, small, mine, set in Vermont at my grandmother's house, shaped entirely around my own history. Told her everything she needed to know. I had not centered her. She received this the way a sovereignty receives an invasion. She decided I was a problem, and she began, with extraordinary patience, to plan accordingly. Brenda was 67 years old and had spent those years perfecting the art of appearing helpful while being dangerous. She brought casseroles to sick neighbors and mentioned the casseroles in every conversation afterward for months. She remembered every birthday and anniversary with military precision and used the information to control rather than celebrate. She chaired her neighborhood association, volunteered at her church, baked beautifully, and used the phrase, "we're family," the way some people use legal documents, to invoke an obligation and immediately request something within its terms. She had opinions about how I cooked pasta and expressed them as helpful observations. Her smile arrived on her face approximately half a second before she wanted it to, which was the tell. The one I noticed early and chose, in my generosity, to dismiss as my own uncharitableness. For the first years of the marriage, I managed her the way you manage a difficult climate, with the right equipment and realistic expectations. The inheritance changed the weather entirely. I felt the shift before I could articulate it. A new precision to her questions, a change in the quality of her attention when I was in the room. What will you do with the Vermont house? Such a large property. The upkeep alone must be significant. Has anyone helped you navigate the estate paperwork? It can be terribly complicated. Is Jason's name on anything yet? Just for practical purposes, in case anything were to happen. When I mentioned these conversations to Jason one Sunday night in January, lying in bed with the rain on the window, he gave me the gentle smile he reserved for moments when he thought I was overthinking. She's just nosy. She's always been nosy. You know that. She doesn't mean anything by it. He said it easily, with the ease of someone stating something entirely true. I believed him. I turned off the lamp. I told myself I was being uncharitable toward a woman who had never done anything to me worse than unsolicited pasta advice. By March, the questions had stopped. Not because Brenda had lost interest, as I would come to understand with cold, physical clarity, but because she had moved past the information-gathering phase and into execution. The questions had done their work. In their place came warmth. 2 spontaneous lunches, small, thoughtful gifts, a kind of laughter and ease I hadn't encountered in her before. I came home from both lunches feeling, with a foolishness that still embarrasses me, that we were finally, after 11 years, crossing into something approaching genuine friendship. I told Jason, I remember the specific quality of his silence before he said, "I'm glad." I heard the words. I did not hear what was underneath the silence, and I should have. The Tuesday everything broke open started with coffee, rain, the gray blazer, and the 9 o'clock meeting that brought Ashworth and Reyes the largest commission in our firm's history, a hospital complex in Seattle. Daniela and I celebrated with terrible champagne from the office refrigerator, warm and sweet and completely undrinkable and absolutely perfect. I called Jason at noon from the windowsill of Daniela's office, city spread gray and glittering below. "That's incredible," he said. "I'm so proud of you." His voice was fractionally off. Not wrong, just off, the way a color can be very slightly not quite right. close enough that you'd miss it entirely unless you'd been looking at the original every day for 11 years. I came home at 7. He was in the living room with his laptop. We had dinner. He mentioned Thursday's dinner at Brenda's, asked how the celebration had gone, laughed when I described the warm champagne. He washed the dishes because it was his turn. We watched an hour of television. He went to bed early. A headache, he said, the kind that needed darkness. And I sat on the couch another 30 minutes before I remembered I'd meant to look up a lamb recipe for Thursday. Brenda didn't eat chicken, and I had been intending to make something that would earn the word impressive. The shared laptop was on the kitchen desk where it always lived. I touched the trackpad, and the screen came back to life, and Jason's personal email was open in the browser. His account, the one I never accessed without cause, the one he had apparently forgotten to close. The inbox was visible in the left panel, the top message, bold and unread, time-stamped 11:47 a.m., had a subject line that expelled the lamb recipe entirely from my mind. Final version, please review before Thursday. The email was from Brenda, sent at 11:47 that morning, while I was raising a plastic cup of warm champagne and calling him to share the best professional news of my year. There was a PDF attached, 42 pages. I sat with my hand on the trackpad and did not move for what felt like a considerable time. The refrigerator hummed. The kitchen tap dripped. 3 drops, then a pause. 3 drops, then a pause. The slow repair that had been on Jason's list for 3 weeks. A car went past on the wet street outside, its headlights drawing a brief traveling oblong of light across the kitchen wall. And the light came and went, and I sat in the dark between its arrival and its disappearance, and felt something enormous and cold forming at the edge of my comprehension, the way you feel the pressure change before a storm arrives. I clicked. The document's title read, Petition for Equitable Family Contribution, Estate of Eleanor Rose Ashworth. I read the opening paragraphs twice. The phrase that finally hit was buried in the second paragraph, accumulated during the period of the Whitmore marriage. My stomach contracted as if I'd been struck. The petition named Brenda as the petitioning party. It cited the estate's full value, $9.8 million, and it requested 40%, $3,920,000, as a reasonable family contribution reflecting the sustained emotional support, caregiving labor, and familial investment provided by Brenda Whitmore during the declining years of the deceased. 40% of every dollar my grandmother had ever denied herself. For emotional support Brenda had never provided. For caregiving labor that had never existed. For proximity to a woman she had never once visited. I turned to page 39, the signature block. Jason's name, neatly typeset, assisting counsel. Not witness, not notary, assisting counsel. He had helped draft this. He had helped engineer the legal framework of a document built to dismantle everything my grandmother left me. He had kissed my forehead this morning. He had said he was proud of me 6 hours ago. He was upstairs right now in the dark with his headache while I sat in his email account reading the evidence of a betrayal so methodical, so patient, so seamlessly woven into the ordinary fabric of our Tuesday that I still could not locate the single thread to pull on to understand when it had begun. My hand started shaking at page 6, a fine, insistent tremor that moved up through my wrists and into my forearms and would not stop no matter how hard I pressed my palms against the desk. I scrolled to the attachments, 3 files. The first, a timeline assembled by Brenda herself, annotated in her precise handwriting, documenting my grandmother's health decline over her final 3 years, each entry noting Brenda's concern, her proximity, her engagement with a woman she had never met. My grandmother, who had once asked me over the phone why Jason's mother had called to ask about her will. I had told her it was a misunderstanding. The second attachment, a financial summary of the estate, prepared by a law firm I didn't recognize. The third, a cover letter from Brenda to that firm. Per our earlier discussions, please proceed with filing before the end of the month. The end of the month. It was the 22nd. 8 days. I closed the laptop, opened it, closed it again, pushed back from the desk and went to the kitchen sink and stood over it with both hands gripping the cold porcelain rim. The tap dripped. 3 drops, pause. 3 drops, pause. I counted them until my breathing slowed. Then I went back to the table, to my grandmother's chair, the one she'd given us when she cleared out her dining room, and I sat down and let myself feel it. All of it. Without managing or containing it. The specific weight of 11 years rearranging themselves around a new and terrible center of gravity. I sat with it until it settled, until it became something I could carry rather than something that was carrying me. Then I opened my own laptop and began to write. Every detail from the document, the petition title, the case number, the filing deadline, Brenda's timeline with its annotations, Jason's name in the signature block, the name of the law firm, the name of the estate attorney. I wrote it all in clear, numbered lines the way my grandmother had taught me to take notes on a financial statement. No impressions, no interpretations, only what is verifiably, demonstrably, inarguably there. Because facts are the only currency that holds its value under pressure. When I finished, I picked up my phone and texted Sophie, "Free tomorrow morning. Early?" She replied in under a minute, "Always. What's wrong?" I wrote back, "I'll explain tomorrow. Nothing's wrong. I just need to think clearly with someone I trust." I set the phone down, sat in the lamp-lit quiet of my kitchen, and then I looked at what I'd written, and I thought about my grandmother's hands folding a letter at her kitchen table, and I thought about what she would have told me to do. My grandmother, who had known what Brenda was asking about before I did. My grandmother, who had told me not to let anyone redraw the floor plan without my permission. I had one question to ask, just one. And once I had the answer to that question, I was going to make sure that Brenda Whitmore and my husband understood exactly how badly they had miscalculated. Sophie arrived at 7:15 the next morning with 2 large coffees and the particular expression she reserved for situations she already suspected were worse than I'd let on over text. She was my oldest friend. We'd been roommates at 22, had watched each other through 2 careers and 3 bad relationships and one genuinely excellent one. And she had the quality I valued most in anyone. She listened before she spoke. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I slid my notes across to her without saying anything, and she read them in silence. I watched her face change. It didn't change dramatically. Sophie's face never changed dramatically. But there was a tightening around her eyes, a slight compression of her mouth, that I recognized as the expression she wore when something was worse than expected. "Assisting counsel," she said when she reached Jason's name. Not a question. A statement with a very specific weight. "Yes," I said. She set the papers down. She picked up her coffee. She said, "Do you have a lawyer?" "Not yet. That's what I need from you this morning. I need the name of someone very good." "I know someone very good," she said. "His name is David Park. He did my divorce. He's the best I've encountered." She paused. "Clara, you understand what this means? The fact that Jason is listed as assisting counsel. This isn't just him failing to warn you. This is active participation." "I know what it means," I said. My voice came out very level and very quiet. Not because I was calm, I hadn't slept, but because somewhere in the hours between midnight and 6 a.m., sitting at that kitchen table with my notes and my grandmother's chair and the dripping tap, the hot, ragged grief of it had cooled into something that had a shape and a temperature I could work with, the kind of cold that is useful, the kind you can build something with. David Park had an office on the 12th floor of a building downtown, with a view of the river and a desk that was conspicuously clear. The desk of a man who did not tolerate clutter in any of its forms. He was in his mid-50s, compact and precise, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain. He read my notes, then the document itself. I had photographed every page with my phone, without expression. When he finished, he took off his glasses, folded them onto the desk, and looked at me with the kind of directness that dispenses entirely with the preliminary courtesy of building up to the point. "This petition has no legal basis," he said. "The estate was inherited, not joint property. Vermont probate law is explicit. No court will grant this." He paused. "But that isn't necessarily the point of it." "What do you mean?" "I mean that a petition like this, whether or not it succeeds in court, creates disruption. It creates cost, your legal fees, your time, your energy. It creates leverage. If they filed this and simultaneously approached you with a settlement offer, a smaller number, more reasonable sounding than $4 million, many people would settle simply to make the problem go away." He looked at me steadily. "That's the strategy. Create an expensive problem. Offer to make it disappear for a price." I sat with that for a moment. The elegant, merciless logic of it. Brenda hadn't expected to win in court. She had expected me to pay to avoid court. I thought about the Thursday dinner. I thought about the lamb recipe I had been looking up when I found the petition. She had been planning to present the settlement offer at that dinner, at her table, in her territory, surrounded by the ambient pressure of family obligation and Jason's carefully weighted silence. She had been planning to hand me the smaller number and frame it as generosity. "How long do I have before they file?" I asked. 8 days, David said. "Plenty of time. Here's what we're going to do." I drove home that afternoon with a plan that was simple, clean, and, unlike Brenda's, genuinely unassailable. I would not confront her yet. I would not confront Jason yet. I would spend the next 4 days making the legal ground beneath them entirely unsurvivable, and then I would ask my question. I did not sleep much in those 4 days. I worked at the kitchen table after Jason went to bed, building the documentation David needed, the timeline of the estate, the probate filings, the clear, unambiguous paper trail establishing that Eleanor's investments had been managed independently, predating my marriage by decades, with no connection whatsoever to anything that could be called a joint marital asset. David filed a preemptive motion. He also, with my permission, contacted the law firm Brenda had hired and informed them of a significant problem with their petition. Specifically, that the assisting counsel listed on the document, Jason Whitmore, was the spouse of the respondent, which created a conflict of interest so egregious that it didn't merely weaken the petition. It potentially exposed Jason to a disciplinary complaint with the state bar. That was the question, the one I had been building toward since Tuesday night. Not "how could you?" Not "did you know?" Just one question, precise as a scalpel, aimed at the only thing that would make them understand the position they were actually in. I waited until Thursday. I drove to Brenda's house for dinner. I had made the lamb. I had made it well. Slow roasted with garlic and rosemary, the kind of dish that fills a kitchen with warmth and requires patience. 2 things I was currently operating with in abundance. I carried it in a covered dish and rang the doorbell, and Brenda opened the door in her pearls and her pleasant, practiced smile, and she said, "Clara, you look lovely," with the warmth of someone who is about to do you a small, manageable harm. Jason was already there, in the kitchen, opening wine. He came to kiss me hello, and his eyes, when they met mine, were slightly too careful, slightly too neutral. The eyes of a man maintaining a performance. I smiled. I said the drive had been fine. I set the lamb on the counter. Dinner was elaborate in the way that Brenda's strategic dinners always were. Good china, real silver, candles that cast everything in a flattering warmth designed to suggest intimacy and goodwill. She was gracious through the first course. Jason talked about a case. I ate and listened and made appropriate responses and watched the meal move toward its destination, the way you watch a train on the wrong track, knowing what is coming but waiting for the right moment to throw the switch. It came with dessert. Brenda set down a lemon tart she had made herself. She always made the dessert herself. and she folded her hands in her lap and said, in a voice of such careful, measured kindness that I almost admired it, "Clara, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about, something important, about Eleanor's estate." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It felt considerably longer. Jason set down his fork. He did not look at me. He looked at the table with the expression of a man waiting for something he has been told will be manageable. I looked at Brenda. I waited until she began again. "I know this is sensitive, and I want you to know that everything I'm about to say comes from a place of love for this family." And then I said very quietly, very clearly, "Brenda, before you continue, I need to ask you one question." A pause. "Does the law firm you hired know that the assisting counsel on your petition is the respondent's spouse?" The room went entirely still, a different kind of still from normal silence, pressurized like the moment before a sound. Brenda's face did something complicated and failed to fully complete it. The warmth stayed, technically, in the arrangement of her features, but it had lost its electricity. It was the smile without the signal. The locked door my grandmother had described. Jason's head came up slowly. He looked at me, and in his eyes, for the first time since I had found the document, I saw something I recognized as the real him, a flash of sheer, undisguised alarm. Brenda began, "Because David Park filed a notice with the court this morning," I said. I kept my voice even and unhurried. "He also sent a letter to your law firm explaining the conflict of interest, and he filed a preliminary response to the petition establishing that Eleanor's estate was entirely independent of our marital assets, which means the legal theory the petition is built on doesn't hold under Vermont probate law, which Jason knows." I paused. "He also filed a complaint with the State Bar's Ethics Review Office. That process has begun. I cannot stop it, and I won't." Jason made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a man understanding suddenly and completely what the real cost of the plan he'd agreed to actually looked like. "You filed a complaint," he said, low, something in it that was almost disbelief. "David Park filed it with my authorization, because what you both did had consequences that don't stop at our marriage." I stood up. I was very calm. The coldness I had found at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. was still there, still functional, still completely in my control. "I'm going to take the lamb home. I made it well, and I'm not going to waste it." I picked up the covered dish. I looked at Jason one last time. "I'll text you a hotel recommendation tonight. You should make a reservation." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at his mother. A fast, involuntary look, the look of a man checking whether backup is still available, and she gave him nothing. She was very still in her chair, hands folded in her lap, the lemon tart on the table between us untouched. She was processing. I could see her processing. Brenda Whitmore was not stupid. She was understanding in real time that the ground she had spent months preparing had already been quietly, completely removed. "After everything I have done for this family," she said finally. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, shed cleanly, the way a coat comes off when there is no longer any need for it. "After everything I sacrificed to raise Jason alone, after the years I invested in being present for this marriage." "You didn't attend our wedding," I said. The silence was very clean, very absolute. "I had a prior commitment." "You chose not to come," I said. "That's fine, but let's not rewrite it." I looked at her steadily, with the specific quality of attention my grandmother had taught me. Not hostile, not triumphant, just fully and completely present. "The petition will be dismissed. The ethics complaint is a matter of public record. Those are the consequences of the decisions that were made." I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. "Goodbye, Brenda." I drove home in the dark, with the lamb on the passenger seat and the heater going and the radio off. My hands were entirely steady on the wheel. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her house in Vermont. The clapboard siding, the stone wall along the driveway, the kitchen window where the light always seemed warmer than anywhere else I'd ever been. I thought about what she had built, dollar by patient dollar, over a life lived with precision and without waste. And I thought, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that it was mine. It had always been mine. Nothing that had happened in the last 8 days had changed that, and nothing was going to. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not cinematic, not clean, not the way a resolution looks when compressed into a final scene. They were administrative and exhausting, and sometimes deeply painful. Jason moved into a hotel, and then, 2 weeks later, a sublet near his office. He hired his own attorney, a neutral third party, not a colleague, which was, in its way, the first genuinely independent decision I had seen him make in connection with any of this. The bar complaint proceeded. The outcome was not disbarment, it was a formal reprimand, a required ethics course, and a year of probationary oversight. But it was real, and it was public record, the kind of thing that follows a corporate attorney's career in ways that are difficult to quantify and impossible to erase. He knew that. He had known it the moment I said it at the dinner table. The petition was dismissed 4 days before its filing deadline. David Park sent me the notice by email at 11 in the morning, and I read it at my desk at Ashworth and Reyes, and Daniela brought me coffee without being asked, which is the kind of friendship that doesn't require explanation. Brenda sent one letter, handwritten on her cream stationery, 2 weeks after the dinner. It said she was sorry I had taken things so personally, and that she hoped one day I would understand she had been acting in the best interests of the family. I read it twice. I filed it because David had told me to keep everything. I did not reply. Sophie took me to Vermont in October. We drove up on a Friday evening, arriving after dark, and I unlocked my grandmother's house for the first time since the estate had cleared. The air inside cool and still, carrying the particular smell of old wood and books, and something I had no better word for than Eleanor, the accumulated specific presence of a person who had lived fully in a space for many decades. I turned on the kitchen light. I sat in her chair. I looked at the chessboard she had kept on the sideboard, still set up from our last game. She had been winning, as she almost always was, and I put my hand on one of her pieces and held it for a while. Outside, the Vermont night was clear and cold, the stars enormous in the way they only are when there is no competing light for miles. Sophie made tea. We sat at the kitchen table until late, and I told her the whole story from beginning to end. From the French press on Tuesday morning to the lamb at Brenda's table. And when I finished, she said, "Your grandmother would have enjoyed it. The one question, she would have appreciated the economy of it." She was right. Eleanor had never used 2 words when one would do. She had never used force when precision was available. She had taught me chess at this very table because she believed it was the most honest game ever invented. Every piece has known capabilities. The board is fully visible to both players, and the outcome is determined entirely by who thinks more clearly. No luck, no hidden information, no appeals to sentiment. Just, what can you see? And what will you do with it? The house in Vermont is mine. The investments are intact, growing the way my grandmother's money always grew, slowly, steadily, without drama. I drive up 4 times a year, the same as always, and I sit in Eleanor's chair, and sometimes at night I play chess against myself at the kitchen table, which is less often than it used to be. The chessboard is still set up from our last game. I haven't moved her pieces. I have moved mine. Jason and I are divorced. He called once, 6 months after the dinner, and said he was sorry in a way that sounded as though he meant a version of it, the version in which he genuinely hadn't known how to resist the pull of what his mother asked. I listened. I said, "I believe you didn't know how to resist it. I don't think that's enough, but I believe it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "She was always going to be the person she was." And I said, "Yes, and so was I. We haven't spoken since. I was told to give up $9.8 million. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue or plead or perform the grief they were counting on. I just asked one question. Does the law firm know what you did? And the answer to that question did everything else for me. The way a single precise move on a chessboard can collapse a strategy that took months to build. My grandmother would have approved. She was always better at this game than anyone who sat across from her ever understood, right up until the moment they lost.